What's shaking, you guys? Welcome back to the Let's Go Win podcast, where we are here to help you be happy, healthy, wealthy, and get better every single day. I had the pleasure of bringing on this gentleman. He is awesome. I was on his show, and he wrote a cool book on leadership, which I have not read, but I'm going to check out. And he's got another book coming out that we're going to discuss in this episode. This dude is awesome. James Robinson is a leadership expert, business strategist, and author of the best-selling book, 9 Minutes on Monday. With over 20 years of experience, he specializes in helping leaders grow their businesses, build high-performing teams, and achieve sustainable success. Well, James, brother, it's good to see you again. How you doing, man? How's the day treating you
Nice
today?
to see you, JM. Well, things are great. I mean, start of the year, let's go.
Yeah, man. Start of the year, it's always you and I have talked off air where it's kind of that fresh start. Sometimes you're in the middle of a project, but this year seems different for me. I don't know. How's it going for you, brother? You have anything new that you're ideating on, or what are you working on right now? I know you've done some cool stuff. We'll talk about that, but I'm curious, what does 2025 look like for you?
I am so into goals that every year I always create these vision boards and everything like that. And this year I thought I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to do that. And I have enough goals that are already, out there that I've not reached yet. So I thought nothing new. Let's just keep going. So that's a big change for me. It was hard to not go through that process because it's very inspiring. I always like that at the end of the year.
So let's talk about goals for a second, because it is the first of the year, and I think goals are one of those things everybody talks about. Everybody does them slightly different. So what does that look like for you? You said I got vision boards, I have goals. I mean, I have all these things out there. How many are there for you, brother? Because me, I have a specific system I use, but I'm curious, what are you doing? What does that look like to hold you accountable to some of these goals?
Great question. So I keep on my iPad, it's like a vision board. For each year, I create a new one. But what I did at the end of last year which was just a few weeks ago, I went back to the vision board and I just wrote, succeeded or failed beside each goal. And there was a lot of goals that just failed. And I was like, I wouldn't encourage people to do this process, but I just wanted to be really honest. Did I get that or not? No, I didn't get that. I failed at reaching that goal. And I thought, man, even though there was some really cool things that happened, I signed a new book deal and I wrote a new book that's coming out, but there was still so many goals that I thought, man, I've got to stop doing this, reaching so big all the time. So anyways, this is just, talk to me in a year. I might say, JM, that was a terrible decision on my part, or it might be brilliant. I don't know.
Well, I know you have certainly the one book you're known for, 9 Minutes on Monday, which I'd love to hear, your thoughts on that. It's been a little bit since that book came out, and obviously that is on leadership. Tell me a bit about that book, and then tell me what you're working on. I think it's coming out in summertime, if I'm not mistaken. So
yeah, for sure. I'll definitely get to that. Thank you. So when you think about leadership, one of the challenges of leadership is that it's just this nebulous thing, right? I remember one time I was exercising beside this doctor and he asked me what I do. I said, oh, I do leadership training in big companies. And he said, oh, that's so great because leadership is so nebulous. And I know what he meant, right? You look at a nebula, there's no edges to it. And because we're dealing with people, so there's all this complexity. Where we at least what our brain likes, is we're drawn to simplicity, clarity. That's why we love to-do lists. We check them off. They decrease our stress. But when you got a team of 7 people that you're leading, what do you check off on that? And so what happens is, for a lot of leaders, they will get stuck in the weeds because it's a lot easier to go, let me go return an email, than go talk with Mary about her bad attitude at the meeting. And so sort of the checklist wins every time. So in 9 Minutes on Monday, the idea is that it's not so much that people are bad leaders. It's just that they get so busy that they're not intentional. And leadership is one of those things you have to be intentional about. So 9 Minutes on Monday, it's a simple concept. The idea is that every Monday when you come into your office, before you jump into your work, before you open your inbox, what you do is you sit down and you ask yourself 9 simple questions. And each question relates to one of these engagement drivers that I teach. And each question, at least your answer to it, sets up a mini micro goal for you for the week. I mean, it's simple stuff like, who am I going to reward or recognize this week? Who am I going to give feedback to this week, right? Who am I going to help coach or grow this week? And by doing that, this really goes back to like first things first, right? It's putting the leadership things first so they don't get squeezed out, because there's always a jungle that's encroaching on all of us.
Well, what I like about it is the framework being simple. As you said, leadership, if you have a philosophy and you follow it, yes, that's going to help keep it simple. However, you have a whole bunch of other tasks to do too in your role in the company. And so I'd like this idea where it's like, hey, who am I going to reward? And I'm going to be intentional about it. Make sure that I see Todd and, hey, Todd, you're doing a great job. I want to make sure I give that to you. I think that doesn't get looked at very often, even by leadership experts, where even myself, I know in my own company, I need to be asking these questions. Did I do a great job of rewarding my team? Did I make sure to go out of my way? So I really like that. I guess my question is, how did you know leadership was your path, brother? At what point were you like, yep, this is what I'm going to do in life? Because as you and I were talking off air, I was asking myself the same question. I was like, when did I know? So I'm curious for you if there was like a light bulb moment or how that happened.
That's a great question. And I don't know that there was a single moment. In fact, what had happened was I was in college and I wanted to become a film producer. That was like my dream in life, was to make movies. And I started attending this local church with a lot of young college students, and I really enjoyed it. And then one summer they said, "Hey, do you want a summer job? You can go work for the church for the summer." And I thought, well, this beats serving tables, so sure. But as I worked with them for the summer, I had such a great time because it was infused with purpose. It was helping people. And that was the first time. I mean, all my summer jobs have been like working at the golf course and landscaping. And now I was doing something that I felt like had an impact on people. So I didn't make the connection at the time that that was leadership. And when I graduated from college, that same church was like, "Hey, why don't you come work for us?" So I had no plans ever of doing that, but that's how I ended up going into ministry. It was just this idea of, oh, I love helping people. And at some point along the way, they said, "Hey, we want you to come to this leadership meeting." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And that's really where it started. But where my company started was taking the things that I had learned in a spiritual environment, and we were training leaders in a not-for-profit setting, and then thinking, hey, I want to teach and expand on some of these in the not-for-profit world. That's where it started. And then I realized, oh, these principles, they are timeless. It's doesn't matter if you're a not-for-profit or a Fortune 100. These principles are sound. So that's really where that began. But I think, Jam, if I'm really honest, I think most of my career, I I felt like an imposter as a leader. I really felt like you've got the
Hmm.
wrong guy, even though I was often outperforming many of my peers in different organizations, in our sister organizations. I still felt like, yeah, this is not natural to me. Looking back now, I see that I worked hard to develop some of the skills to lead, and but not that I felt like a leader.
Now that's interesting because obviously you write a book on it. It goes, viral, I guess would be the term now, and people are looking at you a leader, and yet you're feeling in the early, at least in the early part of your world, I'm not that guy. I am the imposter. At what point did you realize, you know what? I'm bringing a ton of value. And the other question or thought that I want to weave in here, so many leaders that I know, and you and I know you spent time with John Maxwell, probably the leadership guru, if you will. It's so interesting that so many did have a background being a pastor, a minister. That servant leader heart, I guess, is really where maybe that's the connection. So I'd like to know, at what point did you know I'm not an imposter? I am a great leader. I'm helping so many people. And what do you think the connection is with that pastor minister background with a lot of leadership experts? Because I'm telling you, brother, it's not an uncommon story. And my best guess is it's a servant leader. So, two questions thrown at you. Take it as
No
you will.
worries. To your first question, I can think of maybe 3 moments that stood out to me. The first was I was speaking at a really large HR conference, and I had been invited back. I don't know, maybe it was my 3rd year. And then I was doing like a breakout session. Well, anyways, one of the guys on stage, he was an expert in motivation and he was teaching it. And as he was teaching it, I was like, okay, I know that. And he began citing different studies from, the world of psychology and different psychologists and what they've done. And like every study he would bring up, I'm like, I know that study. Because I had studied so much. And for that moment, I was like, I think I know more than I give myself credit for. The second one was when I wrote my book, and then McGraw-Hill called me and said that they were going to publish it. And my first question was, did you guys even read it? That was my first question. Like, that's where I was at. Like, did you read it? It's like, no, James, they didn't read your book. They're just going to publish it. So the third one was getting invited by John Maxwell's team to go with him to South America. And it was just him and I for the day. And why that was a huge deal for me was because like my first leadership book I ever read was 21 Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. I was just this young preacher. And I had really just gobbled that up. And now here I am on stage in the green room with him. And that was just this moment of like, wow, this has been quite the journey. And I guess the last one would be because a big insecurity I had was, I cut my teeth in a not-for-profit setting. So when I got into the business world, actually, I hid at first my background. I didn't tell people that I had spent years as a preacher first because I thought, oh, they'll look at that with less authority. But it wasn't until I began seeing that as I was helping these clients either turn around their engagement scores, turn around their revenue, their profit, that I was like, oh, I'm making a difference here. So again, hopefully everyone listening, you are way further ahead than I was at different ages. But yeah, that was my journey. It just took me a long time to believe, to believe in myself as a leader, even though I was doing it the entire time.
Yeah, and I almost wonder as well how much of that maybe the background that you and I somewhat share. I know you're from Canada, I'm from Montana, not far from one another, actually. I know talking about myself, making sure you're humble was instilled. Like, do not talk, it's about everyone else. And I'm curious if that was maybe a part of your journey as well, because that served me well in so many regards. And yet, I think at times, perhaps I played small in certain times because you don't want to have the light shine in you. Am I totally projecting that upon you, or was it a similar background for you?
For sure, it was similar. That generation, especially for us that grew up in more like agrarian areas, like Montana, Alberta, ranching country, that whole too big for your britches, that was just one of those things. Like it was almost next to being a thief or a murderer, the worst thing you could be was somebody who was cocky and arrogant. So you didn't do that. I do remember when I first started my business, it was very difficult to self-promote because, what do you say? Like you're a one-person show and you got to write your bio on your webpage. And, what I want to say is, well, he's okay sometimes. He even clocks are right twice a day, but then you're like, oh, okay. Like it really exposes some of those inner beliefs you got to deal with. And to your second question about why is it that a lot of preachers come out and end up helping? I think there's multiple answers to that. But, when I look at my own road, when you have to lead in a not-for-profit setting, especially in a church setting, it's difficult and so if you cut your teeth on leadership there, it really translates into so many different areas because you are leading a group of people. So you have a staff, so you get paid staff, but then you have this massive group of volunteers that You have to keep motivated. You have to keep inspired. You can't fire them. You can't kick them out. And there's all sorts of relationship, infighting and problems. Some people don't want to think their church has that, but every church does. And there's all these politics that you got to roll through. So I think it's great training ground. And I think a lot of people who end up transitioning out of ministry, I don't know that it's because they just maybe they just get tired of. There's a certain wear and tear when you're working in ministry. So for me, it was just when ministry became a job to me, and then I thought, I'm not enjoying this anymore. I should probably not be in this role. And then that's when I thought, okay, I need to transition.
Well, I do know from a speaker standpoint, obviously some of the greatest speakers have that background from a church. I mean, that's what their job is, really, to speak the word. So I know that lends itself, and I imagine, just being a guest on your show and now listening to you talk now, you have an eloquence about you. You're well thought out, and yet willing to be vulnerable and be like, yeah, man, I'm going to mess up sometimes. I'm curious, in your time, because again, not everybody gets to spend a day with John Maxwell or gets to spend time around these leaders. When you think of a leader, brother, what are the attributes that you're like, guys, these are the 1 to 3 things that I just feel a great leader possesses? Because I can certainly talk about the poor leaders, but I'd love to focus a bit on some of the great leadership aspects.
For sure. The things I will say are going to be the exact same things when I've asked hundreds of people that same question. I asked them the question of, think of a great leader that you had in your life at some point, and then why are you thinking about them right now? What was it about them? And as people share their answers, there's just a DNA signature to it, and it has to do with a couple of different things. One is example. In some way, they were an example. Whether they worked hard, they were, in a sense, nothing was below them. They were willing to do whatever anyone else was having to do. Secondly, that this person cared about me. And I can't tell you how many times this has come back. Just the other day, I was talking to 2 different executives from 2 separate companies, didn't know each other. And we were having a conversation about leadership, and both of them used the same phrase. They were talking about a leader in their past who had really cared about them. And both said this. They said, I would have run through a brick wall for that guy. Because that concept of reciprocity, when you feel like my boss cares about me, then we tend to trust more, right? Open ourselves up more to be influenced, because that's one of the sources of trust. When somebody cares about you, then you tend to trust them more. That, and then this leader pushed me and challenged me and supported me along with that. So those 3 things come out again and again and again, right? They were an example, they cared about me, and they pushed me and didn't let me, perform below my standards. I would add in there a couple of things. A leader is somebody who can really help people feel aligned with purpose in what they're doing. I would definitely throw that in as well.
Yeah, it's, as you were talking, I really wanted to just sit back and visualize. And a leader popped in my head. His name's Don. I haven't talked to him. He was my first basketball coach in college. I haven't talked to him probably since I left that school. And yet that was the face. And you know what, you have given me I'm going to reach out to Don. I hope he's still alive. And I just want to say thank you, because everything you just said, that was him for me. I love that. All right, so you have the new book coming up. Do we have a name for it? Can we reveal that, or is it too early to say?
I don't think it's too early to say. I haven't told anybody this yet, so you're going to be the first to hear it. So the book is called The Call to Climb, and it's a fable. So the idea is that sometimes we get out of alignment with our soul. And I don't mean that from a religious perspective, but that inner life, that spiritual side of us. Sometimes what happens, no, a lot of times what happens is we get out of alignment with that, and we need to get called back. And one of the best things we can do is to disappear for a while. I mean, imagine if everyone listening, if you could just disappear for 3 weeks and, in a sense, go inward and listen. Hey, am I on the path I'm supposed to be on? And so that's the that's the theme of the book. It's this idea, but what happens is the main character just ends up stumbling into this remote village in the Bolivian Andes, and only to find out that the village has been expecting them, because when somebody's life is out of alignment, there's this mountain that calls them to climb so that they might step away from everyone else and have a conversation with their soul. So that's the entire book, is about this conversation, realignment. And a lot of it has to do with, in a sense, reclaiming your life. When you begin to realize how much of your life is, in a sense, not your own. Like, you're making choices that, if you really look at them, you're like, why am I actually doing this? Or even the career I'm in. Like, why am I, if I'm not happy in this career, why am I still in it? Because of what my parents would say if I quit, or because of what my spouse would say, whatever it might be. We all have these moments. And this book was 10 years in the making. And one of the things that floored me, about 12 years ago, I started keeping a journal, and I was pretty faithful, just writing every day. And on my app, on this journal, or that I keep my journal on, this app, they came out with this feature maybe 6 years ago. And when you would log into, write your journal for the day, it would say, hey, do you want to read what you wrote on this day in past years? I'd be like, yeah, sure. It'd be like a stroll through memory lane. But what I began to
Wow.
notice, something eerie, like really eerie, is that I would read past years' journal entries, and they were eerily similar of what I was writing. So similar that some were literally the same. It was the same fears, same doubts, same challenges kept coming up, same. And that's when I realized, you know what? My life is, I am living in a loop, but it's just such a big loop. But by the time I come back around, I don't recognize that I've been there before. And that was eye opening.
So this is a big question, man. When the question that you're answering in this book, the call to climb, because I'm 46 now, and I've built and sold 3 companies. This company is rocking and rolling, and yet there are still moments where I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I supposed to do when I grow up? Do you still have that, James? I'm just curious, because for me, it's a natural question to ask, why am I on this planet? What am I supposed to do? Is this my purpose? Now, I do believe Let's Go Win is my purpose. And here's why. I wrote about it in a journal. I didn't know they had apps for journals. So we'll talk about that off air. But literally, I discovered that I wrote about Let's Go Win when I was 20 years old and totally had forgotten about it. Wrote the book, ended up moving from California to Florida. My wife had me clean out the garage. I find the journal entry with Let's Go Win, the same logo, just in black and white, but it marinated in my brain for 20 some odd years. And so to me, this is my calling. This is my purpose. I found it. And yet some days I'm like, is there something else? So have you answered that question for yourself? I guess is my question, the big question. Why are we on earth? Why are we here? What is our purpose? I mean, these are big questions.
That's a great story, by the way, about your Let's Go Win. Fantastic. I love when I hear things like that. So here's where I've come to, and this is what comes out in the book, is because I've spent so many years like grappling with, what should I be doing, and what business should I be running, what products should I be selling, and because I feel, a little bit of professional ADHD at times, it's just like so many other things I would like to do. So here's where I've come to when it comes to purpose. I think your purpose in life is to become the most honest version of yourself. And here's what I mean. When you think about an oak tree, it starts out as an oak seed. An oak seed, think of that as like the soul of an oak tree. This oak seed has really one desire, and that's to become this oak tree. It's going to become the full expression of what it is. Now, as an oak tree, it will do many things. It will provide shade. It will be a place for animals. It will be a place for people to admire and enjoy. But in a sense, that's not its purpose. Its purpose is just to become that oak tree. So what I would say to you, JM, is that your purpose is really to bring the best, most authentic version of JM to this world. And as you do that, there's going to be things that come out of you, leaves and branches, so to speak. Like for right now, it's let's go win. But let's say in 3 years from now that you start to feel something else on your heart, and then you think, no, but I really want to do this. That's okay as well, because there are so many branches that can come out of your purpose, which is really just you bringing you to the world. So that's how I see it.
Has that been something? Because Let's Go Win Keys to Living Your Best Life. That's my first book. I wrote it for my two sons who are 18 and 15. And the entire idea was exactly what you just said. I wanted them to be their most authentic self, to be completely comfortable with that idea. And I even started chapter 1 with being vulnerable. Vulnerability is chapter 1. Now, again, brother, the background, Montana, I was taught boys don't cry. And being vulnerable was certainly not high on the list of this is who you should be. And yet I really felt that was a mistake in many, many ways for many, many years. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, to be your most authentic self, to be comfortable with that idea, and yet to give yourself the grace and to know that you can go many directions. How has that gone for you, brother? Were you pretty comfortable being your authentic self, or is this something that continues to evolve and shape and change for you?
This has been a later evolution for me in my life, because I was always the one searching for, what am I supposed to be doing? And I always felt like, so often I felt like I was in like the wrong lane. So even when I was a preacher, a lot of people would come to me and they would think, it must be so amazing what you're doing, like there's nothing better you could be doing it. And, I would politely smile, but inside I thought, man, I feel so unhappy. Like, and not only do I feel unhappy, I feel guilty for feeling unhappy. What's God think? I must be so ungrateful. So there was so much inner turmoil. I didn't have the confidence then or I didn't have the insight to think, wait a minute, like God created me with a certain bent, a certain collection of strengths, a certain programming I had from my parents, a certain influences I had growing up on a ranch in the foothills of the Rockies. When you look at your life, and imagine we're going to be a dish on the table, the ingredients that went into, let's say, you, JM, like the ingredients that went into you are so unique that no one shares them. So even though people say, you have unique DNA and no one else has your DNA, even if someone had your DNA, they don't have your path. And our path shapes us. And that's where I think, for me, our purpose really is to be ourselves. Like that's your gift to the world. But what happens is, in a sense, you probably around midlife is when you start to wake up, and there's this, as Dr. James Hollis puts it, a collision of selves. Right? There's the self that I know that I am, and then all of a sudden, but wait a minute, it's not jiving with me anymore. And there's this other self, and eventually those two collide. And when we ignore that, and Dr. Hollis calls this a summons of the soul, right? Which actually was the inspiration for that book. When we ignore that summons, then the soul protests, and it protests with us feeling anxiety, depression, lethargy, just what am I supposed to be doing? So kind of back to your question, for me, this came to me later, and it was freeing for me to realize, oh, wait a minute, there's not this one thing I need to find. Because that put pressure on me as well. Like, what's this one thing? I need to bring the best version of myself to this world and trust that I was designed and created in a way that would be a gift to people.
All right. And I love where this is going, because this is a deeper conversation than just leadership. And I don't mean that leadership's not great. It is. However, this idea of really finding yourself and growing and evolving, how did it look for you when let's just take when you're a pastor and you're feeling these things, creating or separating, or maybe it's boundaries, or releasing people that maybe aren't supporting your growth. What did that look for you? Because this conversation I have very often, where people have, let's say, family members that aren't really supporting their growth. In fact, are really maybe trying to pull them back to the 8-year-old that they remember, or, they don't want them to grow. What does that look like, or what did that look like for you, brother? If you're willing to share, because I seem to be having these conversations a lot with people. I feel there's a lot of people that maybe in my age range are feeling this awakening, whether it's a spiritual awakening or it's a self awakening, to say, you know what? I used to hang out with these people, but they actually don't support what I want. But I'm really kind of tethered to them, and I don't know how to separate. Did you have that experience? Is that something you've gone through?
I did in varying degrees. And that's one of the most difficult things is when I want to say our closest circle, or at least the circle that we run, the pack we run with, is not supportive. And so two things usually come to mind. One is family, that your family members, there's a difference between not being supportive and being toxic. Right. So of course, toxic people, you've got to have some strong boundaries and maybe even remove some people from your life. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but sometimes it does. I think that, so to me, this is why really following your dreams and your authentic version of you is such a catalyst for growth, because it forces you to have the courage to have conversations, to be able to say to someone that you love or that you care about, to say, hey, you know what, when you say that, this is how it makes me feel, and I don't like that. So to me, it always begins with managing that relationship with whatever boundary we're setting. I mean, we teach people how to be around us by what we tolerate. But the other part is, if you have a bigger circle, might be work. For me, it was church. And for people here who maybe you go to a church, or you're part of a religious community, sometimes religious communities, like, the strength is you can find incredible support. But sometimes the weakness is there's an incredibly bad groupthink at times. So, for example, depending what, let's, I'm just going to speak about church because that's background I know. Depending on what church that you grew up in, you might have a really flawed view of money. And I know I did, where when get this. So when I first became a young preacher, it was really instilled in us, hey, like, don't live flashy life, like, don't cause people to struggle in their faith. Like, that's a heavy load that's put on you. So even when I would go rent a house as a young preacher, I would like ask someone, like, hey, do you think this is too nice? Right? That's the idea. Like, is this too nice for me to live in? And years later, I remember I was driving this just terrible junker car, and I was living in Florida. I had no air conditioning, and one of the members of the congregation, they needed something from me, and it was in my trunk. So I walked out to my car with her and her husband, and I opened up the trunk, and then she said, "Is this your car?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, I'm so happy that I don't have one of these preachers that's out driving a Mercedes." And I remember, like, just stepping back for a moment, thinking, that is so messed up that you are so happy that your preacher is driving this junky clunker. But if you struggle like I did with just people pleasing and wanting to make sure that you're not rocking the boat, then that has an incredible impact on you, because to deviate from that norm means judgment. And that's where, coming back full circle to the conversation about soul and I will be who I am. In other words, it's like a, not to use a religious word, but it's like a transgression against your soul not to be who you are. And I think so much more seriously about that now. And yeah, of course, I still deal with that. I still have to talk myself down through things when I'm triggered about something. And it could even be that I'm going to make a post on social media, and then I post it and might be controversial and a bunch of people don't like the post. And I'll feel that right away, like, oh, should I take that post down? And then you have to come back to, but wait a minute, who am I? What do I believe? What's my intention? And have the courage to live your path.
Yeah, and I would say as long as you're not doing anything of malice or ill intent, guess what? Mother Teresa wasn't liked by people. That's just the truth. And I think that's for me where my wife probably struggles with this far more than I ever do. I've had this sort of I don't really care what people think about me for the most part, most of my life. And it's pretty strong that way. I want people to like me, of course, but if you don't, I'm okay with it. But I use that often. I'm like, look, babe, this woman was literally, Mother Teresa, and people didn't like her. So you can't please everyone. I am curious because I also had that self-limiting belief wrapped around money. In fact, I talk about it. I've talked about it on the show. When I made my first 7 figures in a year, I felt terrible. I looked in the mirror and you want to talk imposter syndrome? You want to talk about feeling bad about something that should be celebrated, something that could give back to a church or a nonprofit or build more company to bring more opportunity. I didn't look at it that way. I looked at it like that's for everyone else because of my upbringing. What was your path to kind of overcome that, to realize that money's just something that you can create and can do great things with?
That's a great question. I had to, for me, because part of that was rooted in just religious teachings I had had about money, and to realize that, wait a minute, having a lot of money has nothing to do with your morality. Money is a neutral thing. It's not positive or negative. It's just a multiplier. I've heard that expression before, right? If you're a jerk, you'll be a bigger jerk with money. And if you're a good person, benevolent person, you'll actually be more benevolent with money. So it was a process that didn't happen overnight with an insight. I had to really work on that. And I think what doesn't help us is, depending what circle you're in, like, I'm sure, Jam, you can relate with this. You might have a big win, or maybe you sign a big client. We signed a big client last year and it was a big contract, or, you have a really good month, and then, like, oh, the company made more in a month than, what my friends make in their entire year. And who do you tell that to? Right? You might be excited, you want to share the good news, but then you think, well, I don't want to tell, this person, I don't want to tell this person. And that's why you need those friends around you who, regardless of where they're at, where you're at, like, they are just in your corner, right? They just want to celebrate you. In the same way, what we want to be like that with our friends, right? Like, if our friend opens a business, great, let's go support it. We're not going to ask for a discount, right? Our friend writes a book, we're not going to say, can you get me a free copy? It's like, no, let me buy 5 copies and give them out to people because I'm so happy for you. But, that's not how a lot of friendship circles are.
Yeah, it is, and it is funny. The money thing, as much as I think I've worked on it, I still don't, right? Because I've said it. That's why I wrote my second book. I realized one-on-one coaching, what I charge, I was like, ooh, I want this to be able to be accessible to more than just the select people that can afford it. That's 100% where the idea was. And so it's interesting. You're making me think, which is what great leaders do. I know the book is really focused on mindset, and I don't know if we've already talked about it or if there's something in there where it, as this, I'm thinking of the fable. I'm thinking of the guy going, and did you say to the Andes, or I'm sorry,
Yeah,
which mountain
in
range
South
are we going to?
America.
Yeah, so I'm picturing this guy, and then I'm thinking there's a lot going on when you're up in the mountains, when you're being called somewhere. So talk to me about mindset, brother. And it's an open question. It's not a direct one. I'm just curious what we're weaving into the book without giving it
For
away.
sure. Well, I think when it comes down to it, everything's embedded in us. Like, when we think about who we are, like Jam, you and I just met each other, so it's not like we know each other well. But you think about your friends. If you could describe one of your friends to me, and say, oh, he's like this and he's like this. And really what you're describing is his patterns, right? So we're all describable because of our patterns. And in that same way, our future is predictable. And so here's the scary thing. I took those journal entries I told you about and I uploaded them into AI and I said, hey, analyze this person. And it spit out 6 things. 3 were, positive, 3 were like gut wrenching. And then I said, what's this person's life look like 5 years from now based on the last 12? And then it just said, here's where this person's at in 5 years. And I thought, do I want to be there in 5 years? The answer was no, I didn't. But the truth is, that's exactly where I'll be if I'm not intentional about mindset. So back to your question about mindset, to me, everything is driven by beliefs in 2 areas: how you see yourself, which is the ultimate filter for everything, and how you see the world. So I talk about this in the book, especially about your identity, how you see yourself. You know those photo mosaics? You ever seen one of those, JM, where it's like you see a picture, but then you get closer and you realize it's made up of like 1,000 tiny photos of the person? Our
Yeah.
identity is like that. And all of these little pictures are experiences we've had, which then we tag a label to, right? Because we're narrative creatures. So we'll say things like, well, I'm an immigrant, or I grew up in Montana, or I came from a poor family. Well, these are just these moments and experiences, but the real thing is, but what does that mean? What's the meaning you tag that with? So someone can say, well, I'm an introvert. That's why, I don't like going out and mingling with people. And another person is, I'm an introvert. That's why I'm so powerful in one-on-one conversations. It's the same picture, but a different label that's on it. So it's almost like, so here's the thing. So let's go back to the mosaic analogy, all these little picture tiles. We have the power to flip the tile. It's like, I'm an introvert. That's why I'm shy. I'm going to flip that. I'm an introvert. That's why I have an advantage. And that's what life is. That, to me, it's you make your future, you make your weather, all by what you choose to believe. And I haven't had a chance to read your book yet. I definitely will, but I'm sure you talk about some of these things in there as well. Like, we have the power truly to carve out our life, but those beliefs are so habitual that we don't even know they're there. It's like, how do you tell a fish that they're wet? It's that same thing. So unless you begin living more intentionally, starting to grab those moments where you think, why am I triggered right now? Right? Or, my kid just asked me for money and I don't have enough money to help him out. And now all day I'm really struggling. Okay, well, what's the trigger going on? What's happening? And then you realize, oh, wait, I feel shame. I feel shame that I can't help my child the way I want to help them. And that's the only reason someone feels shame, is because it's being triggered by other beliefs. So that's the hard work, I think, of changing your life, is changing those patterns of thinking.
Yeah, it is ingrained. And I actually do talk about it. I say labels are meant for boxes, they're not meant for people. And yet I use labels too. Hopefully the labels that support us, but certainly the pattern can go back to, this is who I am. And so it's really fascinating, brother. I could ask you questions all day long. I am curious, though, just open forum. I didn't know enough to ask you whatever the question is that's on your heart and mind that you want to make sure to get across the audience as we start to wrap up.
I think it's this, that regardless of where your life is at, where your business is at, where your relationship is at, right? So again, sometimes we have good days, sometimes we have bad days. A lot of people are wanting an easier life, and we pray for easier life. But I always think, don't pray for an easier life, just pray for the courage and strength to bring you to this life. And if you're going through tough times right now, understand they will pass. And there is enough evidence of your strength and resilience already in your life. Sometimes you just have to go back and grab some of it and pull it back into the future, or into the present moment, and just keep climbing. Just don't give up, just keep climbing. And I guess if I was going to say one thing, it would be that.
Awesome. I love that. James, if somebody is looking for the book Call to Climb, which I think if is August, if I'm not
August 5th
mistaken.
is what I'm told. It'll come out, and Wiley is publishing it. So we're excited about that. But they can get a hold of me at jamesrobbins.com, and lots of resources there. And yeah, when the book comes out, love to have another conversation like this, Jam.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, we barely touched business, and I'm so glad because I love what we got to talk about. These are some deep questions that I think people struggle with, they wrestle with, and yet you decided, you know what? Let's talk about it. Let's put it out in a book. It's going to be awesome, brother. So congrats on that and all your success. Thank you so much for showing up and being who you are, man. It was
Thanks,
awesome.
Jam. Really loved being here.
Guys, when the book comes out, we're looking for it, August 5th, Call to Climb. James Robbins, this guy has done some cool stuff, and yet I love what he's just bringing out, talking about these are big questions. So I would love for you to share this with someone that you care about, because all of us are wrestling with these same questions. We're not sitting here saying we know the answers, but we're willing to at least face them. Make sure to share it with somebody that you love and care about. Until next time, remember your mindset matters. I appreciate y'all. We'll talk soon.